Okay, here we are with another fantastical attempt to pull this off with the stream, and hopefully it'll go well. And apologies for my really badly needing a haircut. All right, so let me just take a look. Okay, looks like we are actually live now. So I'm going to put up a false alarm. On the Twitter, okay, and all right, and let all my people know, and let's get to it. Okay, so there may not be many, if any, people here tonight to watch this stream, but I kind of am just doing this to record a video to show how this stuff works so that people can check it out later, because I've been working on a really cool and interesting new way to use React components that I'm super excited about, and it takes a minute to kind of wrap your head around it because it's not something that has been seen before as far as I'm aware, and the people who I've shown it to or talked to about it haven't really immediately had a good understanding of what's is going on with it. So I kind of wanted to show like beginning to end, like how to get this implemented and how it looks and how it works in practice, because I think it's something that a lot of people might find to be useful or interesting to experiment and mess around with when they're building static sites that include interactivity or that kind of blur the line between like where you might need some pieces of React or some virtual DOM stuff. Also extremely useful for any sites that just want to have shared components between different properties. So if you, for example, have a few different products that your company puts out, and each of them have their own site, but you have very commonly shared utilities between those sites, using components is a great way to wrap up your shared elements and kind of like version them and use them across different sites without just having to kind of manually keep them in sync. So I'll show you the plugin that is the basis for this, and it's Reshape Preact SSR. And naming of this might change a little bit because really it's not server-side rendering at all. It's purely static rendering, and React, I chose Preact just because it's smaller and faster than React without any downsides that I really know of. So why not use it? And I really like a lot of the talks and the work that the author has done as far as like making the source really accessible and a place to learn from. So I really appreciate this project in general. However, this is easily swappable into React because they have literally the same API. So if you are a hardcore React user and you're not down with Preact, it's fine. You can just fork this and just change the name and it would work fine. And that would get you some nice open source points for that as well. But in the meantime, I just want to show this quickly, and this as well doesn't really have anything to do with Spike, which is the static site generator I spent a lot of time on. It's purely a Reshape project, and Reshape is just a general purpose HTML parser and plugin platform. So while I'm going to show this working on Spike, it is absolutely not tied to Spike. You could use this with any other static generator setup as long as it could implement Reshape. And I think anything could. We have a nice Webpack loader. You can have gulp tasks for it. Like you can run this any way you want. So the theory behind this is essentially that you will put in a essentially the same exact syntax as you would for a custom element, a spec compliant custom element into your HTML. And in your configuration, you would map that name to the name of a React component. which you could see an example of here. This is using the hyperscript syntax just because I don't want to mess with JSX in here, but this is JSX, as you'll see in a minute. And it will process that and essentially render your component to a string and output the value of your component. Additionally, it includes utilities that allow you to rehydrate this initial state on the client side and initialize the component once your JavaScript loads to basically upgrade it with JavaScript capabilities as you would expect of a component. So you could do this like just for a regular non-interactive static component if for some reason you just wanted to be able to share and extract it and have it live in its own little place. Or you can do it for an interactive component and then you'll get the full power of React for it. But meanwhile, not have to actually run a server because it's a static site still, which is cool. And I feel like server rendering is kind of this like, it seems like kind of like a patch for the fact that ultimately you do want to render a static site, but instead you have this server going and rendering things on demand. Instead of doing that, this will just run your site as static wherever you choose to do it, not mandatorily, not mandatory. And yeah, I'm gonna stop talking about it. I think that showing is the best way, and we'll talk more about it after. But I just wanted to show you guys this plugin because this is really how you make it happen. So I'm going to go to my desktop and I'm going to fire up a new Spike project, and it will be called Preact static example. Okay. So we will call it Preact static example. Cool thing. And I'm just on. And no production config file. So it's going to run up the dependencies for me. Meanwhile, I'm going to cd into the folder and open it up in Atom, which takes a minute to initialize, unfortunately, because Atom is slow. If it were fast, it would really be great, though. Look at the slowness. Bunch of business. Okay, so here's our app.js file. And this is pretty minimally configured. I'm going to drop the source map because I don't care about source maps. I'm sorry. I'm going to one-line this. And let's get rid of page ID because I don't need that for this example. I'll just have it return the basic. I'll just have it return an empty object here as the locals because I'm not currently using locals. And we will drop this folder because we don't need it for this example. We'll drop this because I don't use NVM. And finally, we'll go into the layout, and I'm going to drop this block and this one, compress these a little bit. We'll just load out the main.js file, and we'll get rid of the page ID because this is the most simple of use cases. Okay, by now we're done with our depths, so we're just going to cd into here, and then I'm going to add Preact. Sorry, it's reshape Preact SSR as a dependency, and it will regenerate my stuff here. So reshape Preact SSR is our thing, and then this guy will be, I'll just call this SSR. And we have to add this as a plugin to, sorry, not to Webpack, but rather to our reshape. And so to append a plugin here, I'm just going to drop this again down to 2 lines and run append plugins. And we'll call this SSR. Okay. So what we need to pass in here, like we saw before, is the name of a custom element. So I'll just call it my element, or my component, and then an actual component. So that doesn't exist yet, but we'll just pretend it does. And we'll place this in assets, JS, components, my component. Okay. So that should give us a basic render of any element called my component will render as this. So let's drop that in here. Here's our spike example. We'll do and we'll just do my component. Okay, and we'll pass a prop in here, and we'll also give it a child element because we want to show that all of this stuff will work fine with our elements. And let me just check and see if anyone's watching quickly here. Okay, cool, great. Someone is here. 4 people are here. Okay, great. Let me pop out this live chat so that I can see it and don't have to check back here. And if anyone has any questions about this at any point, then feel free to just pop them into the chat, and I'm happy to answer them right away. And if you're watching this later, just feel free to hit me on Twitter and ask the questions. That's my Twitter handle. Maybe I should make that our custom element. Have it render a little Twitter view. And I'm happy to answer questions anytime. Some people who have been using Spike for a while, I'm sure will back me up on that. So here's our basic implementation, right? And this looks a lot like using a web component using the custom element spec here. And for anyone that's unfamiliar with SugarML, this is just going to end up looking like this if you wrote it with normal HTML. And I'm going to stick with this because it's default and it's what I like to use, but just so you know, it's very, very simple to use normal HTML with Spike. All you have to do is just jump in here and do parse or false, and you're good. It will just run it as normal HTML. You just have to change these extensions and obviously change the syntax over to being regular HTML. Okay, but this is kind of like our Jade pug-like syntax, and so I'm sure most of you will recognize this as being normal. Okay, we got some activity. Oh, hi. Yeah, this is your opportunity to spam everyone else watching as well. Roots for life. We've been off roots for a little bit, but it's okay. All right, so here's our implementation. Here's our configuration right here. It's very, very slim and minimal. And now all we need to do is actually just make a component. So I'm also going to go ahead and add Preact because that's important for making a Preact component. And then we'll drop into our JavaScript. I'll make a new folder called components. And I will make one called myComponent.js. Cool. All right, so the rest of this is nothing that we're in control of. This is just a normal Preact element. So what you want to do is, and you might be tempted to go import here. This is not a good idea because we're actually requiring it in here. And this app.js is a regular Node file. So since Node still doesn't handle ES modules, that will break, even though I know Webpack does. So unless you want to run Babel register here at the top and configure it to do a conversion of ES modules to regular requires for Node, which I don't because it doesn't seem worth it. You can just use the regular require syntax in here, and that will still work just totally fine with Webpack. So I'm going to require H, which is the essentially create element if you've used React. H is the same thing as that in Preact, which is a nod to Hyperscript, the originator of the target of the compile to, the target that JSX compiles to, I'm sorry. And I'll import component as well, which is the main component class, and then we require Preact here. Okay, cool. So then I can do module.exports equals, and I can do class myComponent extends component from Preact, and there we have a Preact component, and the render method will allow us to spit out just what we need. So here I want to write JSX because I think most people do tend to roll JSX, so we'll configure that quickly, but I'm just going to write it now, and I'll just do hello world here, and it's going to return that. And that's a very basic element. So unfortunately, standard will always give you this warning about H. We need H here because once this goes through Babel, this is just going to compile into this. There are some really great talks from the guy who makes Preact on how JSX works and what it compiles to. I think it's really important to know if you're using JSX what's actually happening. It's not that complicated. It's just a simple little language that compiles down to JavaScript syntax. This just makes it look more friendly and HTML-like. So ultimately, it's going to end up looking like that. So we do actually need H here. And you don't have to do this with React because React, you just require React, and it puts everything scoped onto this element. And so in theory, I could do it with Preact, but I like to just require out what I want, and this is the convention that the author of Preact usually sticks with, just pulling what you need and nothing else. So that's how I usually like to stick with it. And if you want to eliminate this warning, if you use standard, you can just do ESLint disable line, and then it will conveniently go away like magic. So we need to actually get this JSX parsed. So in order to do that, we need to add a Babel plugin. So we're going to do yarn add Babel preset Preact. Pretty straightforward. That will do our JSX parsing and everything. So in here, we want to add that to our Babel config. So I'm just going to go ahead and require Babel preset Preact. Okay, and we'll just call this Preact Babel. And in here, we'll do the same thing, append presets, because this is a preset. This is all just part of these libraries, these standards libraries, which again are not magic. They just are abbreviations on a configuration, much like Babel preset env. We'll put down a bunch of different plugins and configurations so you don't have to do it manually. Same thing going on with these three for anyone uninitiated. And we'll just add Preact here. And that should take care of, oh man, the chair of my, the leg of my chair I'm sitting on just like started wobbling a lot. That would be a classic video if I just blatantly fell off my chair in the middle of a coding example. All right, so this should do the trick here as far as importing that. But we also need Babel to process it here since we're requiring it locally. So we need to do a little bit more work. We need to load up Babel require. So you see what I'm saying? So this is our configuration for Webpack. So when Webpack goes and renders this client side, it'll have no problem. This will already get parsed out, and the JSX will get rendered. However, we're also requiring it here. And when we require it, Babel is not processing a require. So in order to have Babel process a require, we need to use this plugin called Babel it's not Babel require, I'm sorry. It's Babel register. And that's just like gives us a hook on require that before it requires, it'll parse the JSX for us. That means we want to pull this out because we also need to pass the configuration in both places. So I'll just call this JS standard, and we'll drop this down here, and we'll say JS std is this. No problem with the std stuff. And then we also need, let's see, Babel register, and then we can just pass in the same configuration because this is just Babel and this is Babel, so that should do the trick as far as getting our JSX parsed here. If you are authoring independent components, which I do recommend doing if they're shared between more than one site, which is a frequent use case, what you can do is just before you publish as part of the build process, just have it run Babel on the output so that you won't have to do this in your projects, and they'll already the JSX will already be parsed once you consume this. So if you are publishing standalone modules, I'd recommend just doing that, and then you don't have to deal with this. This is just so that I can require this locally and still get this JSX parsed. These are the prices you pay for JSX. Okay, so we added Babel register. I don't know what it was trying to add before. It was taking quite a while. Okay, so let's think about whether our things are taken care of before I run this example and have it crash and burn regardless, because that's how it works with live coding. That's unscripted. We've got our our Babel presets configured here. They're going into Webpack. They're going in locally so that I can require this. This needs that, so good thing we reviewed it. Assets, JS components, my component, that should work. We have some JSX in here. We have a basic Preact component. This can be functional too, so you can go like this. I'll show this, but I'm not going to use it because we're going to take advantage of this class eventually. So you could do a functional component by having it take any params in here. It will take children, and it'll take foo, like that. Any params and all the children come in under children, and then you can just return. This is pretty cool. Really nice, succinct syntax. This will render a full module. The only thing is that you don't get like the lifecycle hooks and all that stuff. These are just for like basic elements, and this is called the functional syntax. This works with both React and Preact. So pretty cool, and actually this is really useful for a lot of elements. For something like a footer that doesn't do too much interactively, you can just run it up like this. It's really nice. But I'm going to use the class example because it's the most frequently seen, and we are going to take advantage of some of the lifecycle hooks later in this example. Okay, so in our package.json we don't need this because I took it out. We have added this guy, we've added this guy, we added this guy, and this guy. So these are our four dependencies that we need in order to run this setup. And I got rid of tests and stuff, so I'll just take that stuff out. I don't need any of it. I don't even need it. I don't even need this. I don't need this. Get rid of it. Okay. So I think the time has come that we're going to run it. I'll run it as a compile because I fully expect an error to occur here, because in life you always forget things. It didn't. Okay, amazing. So let's check public and see what happened. Cool, look at that. It actually did render exactly correctly, which is great. So I'm going to run this as a watch then, and we'll just see how it shows up on the big screen. And remember, in our views, we have this my component here, foo bar and child element, and here it's rendered out as just hello world. It's what we put out from the render method in our component. So this is a full server-side render. If you check the source, you can see that we are server-side rendered, which is really actually a static render, which is great. And what's greater about this is that we didn't have to run our entire app as rendering out of React. We just ran this one piece that we wanted to render as React. All right, so let's pull down these attributes and the child elements, and let's render those too. So let's expand this guy out, and we'll do a little React code. So we'll do div class name equals my component. This is so we can CSS select it later easily. And then we'll go hello from a Preact component. And we'll say the value of foo is, and it will just be this dot props dot foo. That should show up as bar if we've played our cards right. Because you can see this is what we're passing in, and this is just standard React stuff here. And then we'll just run the children right here. I'll just say, here are my lovely children, and we'll render the children right there. I'm sorry, this is this props children. Okay. And so if we just run this up again, we will see that it does indeed. Oh, I think nope. Okay, we got It does indeed come in correctly, so hello from a Preact component. We got the value of who's bar, and here are the lovely children. Cool. So we've got every part of this working and rendering correctly. And I can assure you that I also have ways devised that this component can pull down data that's piped in from external sources. So anything you want to pull in from your CMS, from your API, etc., it can consume those as well. There is one caveat to that, which has to do with the order of operations for reshape. So I'll show you this. Do we have more? Actually, pretty cool. Oh, great. I was hoping it would be. That's what I'm here for. So reshape eval code. Yes. So if you do want to pull down data from remote sources, all you have to do is you need to pass in this eval code plugin just before you pass in SSR, because reshape will render it'll render static pages. It'll also render JavaScript templates that you can store for later and then pass in custom locals to render them differently every time, which is great, a great ability. But because of that, its order of operations is such that you will need to do something like this. It'll need to be like eval code here, and then you'd pass in whatever locals you have. And so this will resolve your locals before they go into the server-side render so that they show up correctly. If you don't do this, you'll get kind of a weird result. But I can assure you that it's been tested out. This works really well. And any data sources that you want, they can go right in to your components. Just like this. So you could do like, each loop, whatever, foo of foos, and then like render out all of your list items and have this be something of an enhanced list, etc. And it works pretty well. Okay, so that's that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually make it work because static rendering this is not really anything special. I could have just put this HTML into into my view directly. The real value of this is that it will boot up once the JavaScript runs, and I can get data binding and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull down render from Preact, which is a really nice tool. And then I will also pull down this component. So my component equals require ./components/my component. Actually, I can import these now because this is pure Webpack. So, and I understand if you don't want to mix up the syntaxes, but I'm going to do it here just to show that we can. And the reason that I'm running imports here and requires here, remember, is that we are requiring this file into Node, which doesn't support ES modules, but this is our client-side route, which goes through Webpack, and Webpack does currently support ES modules. Hopefully this whole, wow, that was a fail. That's what I get for talking while coding. Hopefully this whole mix-up with ES modules will be resolved soon. They're getting shipped into browsers. I know that Node is working on it, so hopefully soon enough we'll just have one unified syntax. But for now, if you do want to use ES modules, you have to do a little bit of special processing, which means putting through Webpack. Okay, so let's just log this out and make sure that it got required correctly. Here we are. Okay. Crumberbatch. I don't really know what Crumberbatch is. Sorry. But it sounds great, and I also want it in my browser. Okay, so here's my component. We got it. It's good. So now what we need to do is render it. So we already have this convenient class name of my component. So if I want to render my component over the top of this component, what I need to do is pass the following into this render function. The first one is your component. The second one is your parent element or context. And the third one is the render target. Yes, I'm sorry, this is not real code. So this is just how React and Preact's render functions work. So you can use JSX for this. So you go my component, and we close that. That's good. If you want, well, actually, you do need H here, right? But if you want, you could do something like this. You can do H my component. That also works because they are equivalent syntaxes. Remember, with JSX, that's how it compiles. Our parent element context. So let's get our render target. First, we're going to get element is document.query selector, and we'll just get dot my component, right? That should select the element property properly. And then we do l dot parent element. That's an easy enough way to run it. And then we do L. So that should do the trick. And we'll come back here and see that, ta-da, we have a slight change, right? So the value of foo is blank now, and the children are blank. And you saw, it's really hard to see because Preact is really, really fast. I can't even get it with a cache clear reload. But if you look at the actual source, you can see that we do have the children and the value of foo is bar. However, once we render it with JavaScript, we've lost that. Question here is why exactly? Obviously, I need to look this up. I'm behind on the internet. So the question is, why do we have nothing here that we had before? This is infuriating. The answer is because we didn't render it. So I could do foo equals wow, wow, wow here, and then when I refresh, it will come up and it will render wow, wow, wow. And if I open this up and close it up and then put a child element, then it will render me some children elements here. And so this is working as expected. And another thing I'm going to do is just import Preact DevTools here because we can get the React DevTools to work, which is great. And here it is, right? So this is a really nice thing, and I would strongly recommend using this client side, getting the DevTools working. So we can see all this stuff here, which is cool. And we can see all the properties and the children, etc. Okay, so here's the final piece of the puzzle. And I'm just going to check, let's see, have it in your browser. Oh, is that my new tab? My new tab? Okay, sorry. This is Tabby Cats Club. This is great. Every tab that you open, it will. Wow, that's a creative name. It'll give you a randomly generated cat, and it's really excellent. Truly excellent. You can get some good stuff out of here. These are very boring examples, but sometimes they come with like hats and various other toys, and when you put your mouse over them, they purr and get really happy. It's great. One of the greatest extensions. Someone's got a crown and is very tired. Okay. Sorry for the delay on that. Definitely would recommend Tabby Cats. Okay. So, okay, back to the final question is, let's say chances are that I want to replicate exactly the same structure as I have here. I want foo to be bar, and I want my child element to be my child element. You can probably imagine a circumstance where you might have a few, like if you had an enhanced navigation bar. And so this is going to become kind of a big pain in the ass when you have to write all of your HTML here and then literally copy exactly the same HTML here. This is a pretty bad situation. It's not exactly acceptable. And we need a way that we can pull this initial state and essentially rehydrate this here and render it the same as it had its initial state. Because otherwise we're repeating ourselves like crazy, and that sucks. So there is a really cool way to do that we built into the reshape plugin. So there are instructions on it, which is reshape Preact SSR. So there's a full explanation of like what this problem is and how to fix it here in the README under hydrating initial state. And probably I'll have to refer to this because I forget the code that I wrote myself. But let's get started with it. I know for sure that what happens is that automatically the plugin will add an extra prop to your component out of the box, and one that's unlikely to conflict with something you added. So I'm going to add this to a data attribute here in my static rendered one, and it's called this.props._ssr. It gets automatically added. This is pure magic. And you could put this on anywhere you want. I just figured data state was a reasonable place to put it. So I'm going to render that, and we'll rerun watch because it went into app.js for the initial static render. If you want to see the change statically, you do have to update it, unfortunately. Okay, so if we go to the source, now you can see that I've got this string here, this long kind of confusing string. So what this is it actually is this whole thing. Sorry, it's not this whole thing. It is this structure parsed into a React virtual DOM, and then stringified and gzipped and base64'd. Okay, so it's basically as brief of a representation of the initial state as we could possibly get, and so this will get rendered out. And these usually tend to be very, very short, and they compress extremely well. So this is not going to add a lot of weight into your initial page, not at all. It's like 1 line, 2 lines, a few characters. Definitely not worth fretting about performance here. So this is our whole initial state that we have ready here. And what we need to do is just take this out and like rehydrate it into an actual VDOM. And then we can just render that VDOM instead of writing it ourselves. Because essentially what happens here is that this gets these H calls get converted into a virtual DOM. And then that gets diffed against the actual DOM and it gets rendered. So what I can do is we're going to require in hydrate initial state, which I think is what I called the function, but let's check the README to be sure. So here's the, yeah, there's our basic setup. And yeah, okay, good. So here's where we add the data property, and here I added under a different thing, but whatever, and here's the example of what it looks like, right? So yeah, it is hydrate initial state. So I pull down hydrate initial state. Whoops, use the wrong syntax again. Oh, and I close Chrome, sorry, instead of minimizing. Okay, no more questions, good. Is anyone watching? That's my other question. Let's see who's here. 4 people, cool, all right. I'm sure more people will come visit once this is recorded. Okay, so I'll require this from reshape Preact SSR. And now what we can do is say, call this initial state, and we will run hydrate initial state. Okay, and this takes a couple of things. First, it takes our actual compressed state here. And second, let's find out in the docs. Man, wrong Chrome. And yep, and so after that, since our initial state actually has this representation, what we need to do is pass it a map, a reverse map, basically, of the component name back to the actual component that we as we required it. So I'll just pass in my component and then map that to my component so that the actual component renders there. And that is our VDOM. So I'll change that to VDOM. And then what we can do is just pass that right in here. Okay, so let's go back to our site. And now you can see that the way it's rendered is exactly the same as we had it in our initial HTML view, which is great. So now you don't need to repeat yourself. You just need this convenient little function that will hydrate the state through, and then you can pass that right through and render it as it is. And you can see in the DevTools that indeed our children are as they were, these 6 paragraphs, and foo is bar, without us having to actually specify any of that client side. And now this is a full component. Do your interactive thing, get your diffing, get redux or whatever. But that's basically what I'm talking about. So I have this thing. It's static dev spike static components example. Okay. So I have this thing where I show a couple of different, and I posted this a while ago, but I know it's a little hard to wrap your head around. But this shows the same exact process. So if you look at this live site, I did the components 3 ways, and you can see that this one was client side only because it just popped in a little bit late. But basically, this example here, it gets rendered as static. You can see the static render here. So this is like fully like super fast, immediate render, works for SEO, works for social shares and everything. Oh, and by the way, another way you can tell is that when you go here and inspect this element, you notice that the SSR property is gone. It used that and it didn't re-render with it. So that's pretty nice. But so the way that I did it here is that we render this out as static HTML, and then we also render it on the client side. So you get the best of both worlds. However, there's more flexibility with what you can do here, right? Like initially, I just only rendered it as HTML, right? So if I get rid of this client-side render, it still looks the same. But if I had interactive parts of this, they wouldn't work because this is just HTML, right? There's no React. We didn't load React at all. We just rendered this. So if you have components that don't require JavaScript interactivity, which is definitely possible, you can just render them and not worry about it on the client side at all. React and Preact are absolutely not necessary. And at the same time, if you don't feel like you want to static render your components, you can just use them as usual and not enter them into your config. So basically, it's your choice per component which way you want to render it. You can just render it static. That's fine. You can render it static and upgrade it to dynamic once the JavaScript loads, which is what we showed here, which I think is probably the majority of use cases. It's the coolest thing for sure. And notice how there was no change, because what happens here is that Preact will look at the existing HTML DOM and only make changes where there were changes. And since we're rendering exactly the same thing, there are no changes. So basically, we get this static render, and it gets upgraded to add any JavaScript hooks that exist, but it doesn't actually change the DOM at all, which is really cool. So you get this immediate render, and then it doesn't actually re-render. Sorry, interrupted myself. And the last way is that you don't even have to use this at all, and you can just use React as usual. So this component example shows all 3 of them. So this one is these are all the same thing. The only thing that's different is this description. They're all the same component. And this one is rendered only as static HTML. So it has this button, but it doesn't do anything because there's no JavaScript. So it can't detect changes to itself. And if you look at the source, you can see, and static only, I didn't even include the state here because it's not needed. I'm not rehydrating it. So it is what it is. It's just a straight HTML. Nobody would ever know that this is a Preact component in any way. And then I have the one that I did this way, just like I did before, which is both client and static. And so this one does work. It counts up. This is interactive. It uses React. And at the same time, you could see the familiar initial state that gets rehydrated. And we still do get the full HTML here. And then for the last one, I just have this client root, which is empty here in the source, you can see. But what we did is we rendered a component into it only on the client side. So this one also interactive, works fine. But we didn't get the server-side render at all because we chose not to. So that's basically all I wanted to cover today. I just wanted to show how this stuff works. I think it's a really great way to build out sites where you still have a fully static site. You don't need to mess with servers, optimizing servers, running them up at all. You can see this is on Netlify. You can deploy one shot to Netlify, and all this still works perfectly fine. But also, you still get the full benefit of being able to use these really great components that have incredible interactive capabilities, way more than this simple button click. So it's been really exciting for us to be working on this because it represents a huge step forward in the way that we build sites, especially sites with shared components across multiple sites, because I can take any one of these files here and package this up as an NPM module and ship it out. But also just whenever there's a time that I feel like I need some more interactive capabilities, but I'm a little bit hesitant to include the entire React library and set it up. Now there's not really any drawbacks at all because I can still static render it, and then whenever React loads and upgrades is when it loads and upgrades. It's not a big deal. I don't pay any performance fees at all in exchange for using it because I still get the initial server render without setting up a server or anything. So we're really stoked about this. I hope that this makes some sense. If anyone has questions about it that's watching right now, feel free to pop them into the chat. Or questions about anything else about Spike or React or any of that stuff, I'm happy to take a shot at those too. But I just wanted to do this quick stream today to show off this new tech that we've been working on, and I hope this is exciting for you guys, and I hope that you pick it up and try it out on your next project. Okay, so that's all. I'm just going to be chilling here. I'll wait a couple of minutes to see if anyone has questions, and if not, then we'll stop and I will go home and try to actually have a life today. Cool. And this example I'm not going to post anywhere. I already have the example that I just showed you guys a minute ago online. The full source is open. You can check that out, and it works exactly the same way. The only reason I wanted to do this today is to kind of show the from scratch approach. And there's a little bit of setup required. I mean, when you look at these 4 depths, each one of them have their own unique spot in the setup. But the amount of extra configuration is quite small. And I would say that the overhead's pretty low for this type of thing. So scenarios of when you use each type. Okay, so I can't honestly think of many scenarios where you'd use a client-side only one. It feels to me like the server render is purely upside. There are some things that you cannot server-side render. Anything that tries to access a window, it will cause some issues in your components. There are some times where components don't server-side render as smoothly as they render client-side, and you might have to make some adjustments. One example is I had an image slider that I was using, Flickety, which is a pretty popular slider, and I wrapped that up into a component and tried to put it in, but it had an issue rendering server-side because as part of the configuration, it tried to access a window object, and there isn't one on the server. So the only scenario where I can see only rendering client-side and not using the server render is if you're having a lot of problems with getting your component to actually render server-side, which is rare and unlikely. For the both scenario, again, anytime that you have any JavaScript interactivity that is part of your element, you would want to do the static and client-side render because you'll get the initial state rendered out as HTML, and then as JavaScript loads, it'll upgrade it with the interactive capabilities. So that's going to be probably the majority of scenarios where you need the component, is you'll run it as both as static by configuring it here, and then also upgrade it here in your client-side JS. And I see the other question I'll take in a second. And for the static only, anytime it doesn't have JavaScript, you don't need to do this, right? So, for example, if you have a footer, if you had a shared footer element, let's say you had a footer that had copyrights, some common links, and you have a few different sites that all have the same the same footer because they're made by the same company. I could see a situation where you'd create a component that is static, the value of the component being that it wraps up a common set of shared markup. You publish this to a private NPM package, and then you consume it on all of your sites and just render it static. It doesn't have any JavaScript, so you don't need to upgrade it. And if you did decide you wanted to add some JavaScript to your footer, at that point you could just pull it in and upgrade it then when you need it. So that would be my scenarios for all three. So most of the time I would say you're seeing both a static render and a hydration on the client side. Sometimes if there's no JavaScript at all, then you could just do a static render. And it's pretty rare that you're going to need client side unless you're really having an issue getting the render to string to actually work. Do you think it is practical to start with one type and transition to another type? Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I think that's actually a great strength of this approach, is that you can really do it however you like. And if you want to start with building a site that's like not server rendered at all, and then add this kind of stuff in later, you're welcome to do that. If you want to start just building out static components and layer on your JavaScript interaction later, also totally fine. I definitely think it's practical, and that's what I've been doing so far. Is most of the time I tend to set it up as static initially, write out the markup, and then I'll go into these components and I'll add interactivity down the line. Oh, hey, Preact. How's it going? Yeah, you did miss that earlier, but good to see you here. I'll show you quickly again. In here, I have this this initialization here, just running it as a custom element essentially. And so what happens is that this state essentially gets, let's see, where's my my example page? Let me see if I can get it. Yeah, okay, so this state gets serialized here and compressed into this little thing, which is just basically a compressed virtual DOM. And then this hydrate initial state will take that property and a map of like what your custom element name was to what your actual component that you represent that, and it will reconstruct a virtual DOM tree, and you can pass that right into render and it'll work. You don't have to do this if you don't want, but there are some use cases where, like I was showing here, like if you have a bunch of different elements here and you didn't want to repeat all of these again with, wow, that was a failure, with something like my component, and then all your like same exact paragraphs in here. In that case, it would be really helpful to kind of just reconstruct the VDOM and have your HTML be your single source of truth for the initial component state. But that being said, you don't have to. So you can render it like this. And I showed this a little earlier in the video. But you can render it like that, and it will run, and you can see that it's working because it gets rid of the children and the props because we just rendered this as empty. So there might be a situation where you would want to have different values, server rendered and client rendered. I can't imagine it off the top, but like it's possible. And if so, you're welcome to just do this the normal way and not use the hydrate initial state piece at all. But I would recommend it. Okay. And there is our initial state. Okay, cool. So I'll chill for another minute or two, and if anyone has anything else they want to talk about or ask about, I wish I could get like people's videos and voices in here. That would be really cool. You are welcome. That would be really cool. But if not, then I will wrap this up for the evening, and let me know if anybody is experimenting with this and testing out. It's definitely something we're going to put to work here at Carrot pretty soon. We're pretty stoked about it. So yeah, definitely let me know, and we can make some things happen. Otherwise, I'll just post this up and kind of include it as a guide for people that are starting to look into this stuff, because it is not something that you probably have seen before. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up, go home, get some food. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And this video will be up on YouTube as usual with the streams. So I'll have a link that goes up in our Static Dev Slack. For anyone that's not in the Static Dev Slack, I will do a shameless plug right now. Just go to staticdevslack.herokuapp.com, and this is like pretty intensive developer talk about any type of static projects. I think most of it right now is centering around Spike. I put it on Heroku for some reason, and so now it takes a really long time to boot up. I hope you guys like sparkly fluff while you wait. But once this does load, and I promise it will eventually, it will give you a way that you can make a Slack account. Yeah, here it is. For Static Dev, and join in and say what's up. So any updates will go in there. You can ask questions anytime in there about this stuff. I've been kind of talking about it for a while and hyping it. And also we have a wonderful Gitter room, gitter.im/staticdev/spike, which is mostly used for fielding sort of questions from newer users at this point. It's not quite as active as before since we started up the Slack channel, but I still am here. I'm checking it. If you put something in here, I'll respond. So welcome to take questions in there as well if you don't feel like you want to add another Slack organization to your list. Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much again, guys, for watching, and we'll be back with more exciting live streams, maybe if I make anything else exciting in my life. All right, see ya.